I had been working cargo holds for 51 years, and I had learned that the dead come up first. That is the truth of salvage over a drowned world. You drag the grapples through the dark water of a place that no longer has a name on any living map, and the first thing the lines bring up is whatever has stopped fighting the current. Furniture, hull plate, the patient, scattered bones of a civilization that went under so long ago that even the silt had forgotten the shape of it. On the Faroan we called the drowned world Alassa, because that was the designation stamped on the survey beacon that had been left orbiting it 3 centuries before any of us were born, and because nobody knew what its people had called it. They were gone. That was the whole reason we were allowed to be there. You do not salvage a place that anyone is still grieving. My name is Aldo Mercer. I was 68 years old that season, on the last contract I ever meant to take, and my job was the simplest job on the ship. When the dredge crews hauled a container up out of Alassa's flooded cities, it came to me in number 3 hold, and I logged its mass and its contents, and I decided whether it was worth keeping or worth dumping. That was all. A clipboard and a grease pencil and a long bright room with the loading hatch standing open to the day side of the planet. Sunlight came up off the water far below and filled that hold all day long, so that even the silt hanging in the air turned to gold, and I worked in it the way an old man works in a garden, slow and sure and grateful to still be of use. I want to be honest about what I was. I was not a brave man. I was not a clever one. I had a bad hip and a worse shoulder and a pension that depended on me finishing the season without making trouble, and I had spent my whole life keeping my head down and my hands moving, which is a thing the menial learn early and never unlearn. If you had told me, that first morning, that the small choices a man makes in a sunlit room would one day be spoken of by the highest beings I would ever lay eyes on, I would have laughed at you, and then I would have gone back to my logbook, because the container was already coming up on the winch, and the winch did not wait for laughter. It came up slow. They always came up slow, the big ones, the dredge straining and the cable singing thin, and Pell on the winch leaning into the controls with his tongue between his teeth. Pell was young enough to be my grandson. He called me old man without any unkindness in it, the way the young do when they have not yet understood that they will be old too. He set the container down on the deck with a care I taught him, soft as setting down a sleeping child, and the water sheeted off it and ran for the drains, and the whole thing steamed in the day warmth like something just born. It was a hold pod. That is the kind of sealed container a ship uses for the cargo it cannot afford to lose, pressure-rated double-hulled, the sort of thing that survives a sinking when nothing else does. This one was older than anything I had pulled all season. It was crusted white with the slow growth of the deep, barnacled and bearded with pale weed, and under the growth its skin was a dark green that had gone almost to bronze, the way old metal does when the sea has had it a long time. There was a glyph on its face, half eaten by the white crust, a long flowing mark I did not recognize and could not read. I noted it down anyway. I noted everything down, 51 years of habit. Dead weight, Pell said over the deck speaker. Reads heavy and it reads warm, probably a coolant leak. Log it and dump it, old man, it's not worth the cut. He was right by the rules. A hold pod that read warm meant a breached cell or a slow chemical fire, and a salvage cut on a breached pod was nothing against the risk of bringing something live and burning into a working hold. The smart thing, the trained thing, the thing I had done 1,000 times, was to log the mass, mark it hazard, and walk away while the dump crew sent it back down into the dark. But it read warm, and warm is not the word you use for a fire. A fire reads hot. Warm is the word you use for a body. I told Pell to give me 10 minutes before he called the dump crew. He sighed the sigh of the young at the slow, and he gave me my 10 minutes, because for all his sighing he was a good boy and he trusted me. I went and got the cutting torch and the long bar, and I worked the seal of that pod by hand, the way you do when you are not sure what is on the other side, and you would rather it not come at you all at once. The seal had corroded into one solid ring. It took me the whole 10 minutes and then some, the sweat running down inside my collar, the sun coming up off the water and lying along my arms, and Pell calling down twice to ask if I was done being sentimental over a coffin. Then the seal gave, and the pod breathed out, and I smelled the inside of it, brine and rust and something underneath that, something living and slow and very, very tired. And I got the bar into the gap, and I levered the great door open, and I looked into the dark of it, and the dark looked back at me out of one filmed and ancient eye the size of my two hands together. I did not run. I have asked myself in the years since why I did not run, and the only answer I have ever found is that the eye was not the eye of a thing that hunts. It was clouded over pale, like sea glass, like a window with frost on the inside, and it moved to find me the way a very old person's eye moves to find a voice in a room, slow and uncertain, and without any threat left in it at all. There was no fire in that pod. There was only her. She was a dragon. I had heard of dragons the way a man hears of any far thing, as a word, as a flag on a chart, as the name of a power that lived out past the lanes I would ever travel. I had never thought to see one, and I had certainly never thought to see one folded into a salvage pod hauled up out of a dead world, half drowned and 3/4 gone, with the deep groan over her like she was part of the wreck. And she was vast, even folded down into that pod with her wings crushed against her sides and her long neck bent back along her own flank. She was bigger than anything alive had any right to be. Her scales were the green-black of deep water, gone bronze along the great ridges of her spine, and the white crust of the sea had taken her too, the same as it had taken the pod, so that in places I could not tell where she ended and the wreck began. Her wings, when I could make them out in the dark, were folded like waterlogged sailcloth, torn and thin, the kind of wing that has not lifted a body off the ground in a lifetime. Her breath came slow. That was the warm the pod had read, not a fire. A great slow heat going out of a great old body, breath by breath, the way a tide goes out, a long pull, a long pause, and you wait, and you are not sure it will come back in, and then it does, but a little less than before. I stood there in the sunlight with the bar still in my hand, and I understood, the way you understand a thing in your gut before your head has caught up, that I was looking at something that was dying. Not hurt, not trapped exactly, though she was that too. Dying, the slow, honest way of being very old in a world that had ended around her. "Old man," Pell said over the speaker, "your 10's up. I'm calling the dump." "No," I said. I did not say it loud. I have never been a man who said anything loud. But I said it, and I went on saying it, in one form or another, for the rest of that season, and it is the only thing I ever did that the great ones thought worth remembering. I will tell you what I did, because the doing of it was small, and the smallness of it is the whole of the matter. I told Pell to leave the pod where it was. I told the captain the same when the captain came down, and the captain, whose name was Halloran and who was not a cruel man, only a tired one with a quota, looked at the great old creature in the pod and went very still, and then told me what I already knew, which was that we were a salvage hauler and not a sanctuary, that the hold I was filling with a dying animal was a hold that should be filling with cut metal, and that there was no line on any manifest anywhere for the keeping of a thing that could not be sold. "I know it," I said. "I'm not asking the ship to keep her. I'm asking the ship to leave her to me." "To you," Halloran said. "My hold, my off hours, my cut if it comes to that. I won't pull her into your numbers. I just won't put her back in the dark." He looked at me a long time. He was a younger man than me by 20 years, and he had a younger man's reasons, but he had also worked salvage long enough to know that the dead come up first, and that a man who has spent his life pulling the dead up out of the cold does not always have it in him to send something living back down into it. He gave me till the end of the season. He gave me the hold on the condition that the work didn't suffer, and the work never did suffer, because I gave her my sleep instead. And he gave me a look, going out, that I have thought about many times since, a look that was half pity and half something I did not have a name for then, and would only learn the name of much later, when I saw it again on the faces of beings far above us both. It was the look of a man watching another man do a thing that costs him, for no reason that the ledger could ever explain, and being unable to look away. So I kept her. I had no idea what she ate, or if she could still eat at all, so I started with water, because water is the thing the body wants last and longest. We made our own water on the Faroan, pulled it out of the air with the condensers, and I had a right to my own ration and no right at all to hers, so I gave her mine. I carried it down in the big sealed jug, 2 gallons at a time, my bad shoulder screaming the whole way down the ladder, and the first day she would not take it, and the second day she would not take it, and on the third day I sat down on the deck beside that great clouded eye with the jug between my knees, and I just talked to her. I don't remember what I said. Old man talk. The weather of a planet I'd never set foot on. The state of my shoulder. The boy Pell and his sighing. The 51 years and the 1 season left in them. I had no one else to talk to in the off hours, you understand. The crew had their cards and their screens and their own kind, and I had always been the quiet one, the one they were fond of and forgot. So I talked to her the way I might have talked to a dog, or to a wife if I'd ever kept one, or to the dead going down past me into the cold all those years. And somewhere in the middle of it, I dipped my hand in the jug and held my wet fingers up to the corner of her mouth. Not pushing, just offering, the way you offer and do not insist. And the great old creature, who could have taken my arm to the shoulder without troubling herself, turned her head slow, so slow, a movement that took the better part of a minute, and touched the water off my fingers with a tongue as long as my forearm and gray as ash, and drank. I am not ashamed to tell you I wept. A man my age, sitting on a cold deck in a column of sunlight, weeping over a dragon drinking off his hand. There was no one to see it but her, and her eyes were too clouded to see much, and so it was the most private thing I ever did, and the truest. After the water came the rest of it. I learned her the way you learn anything you tend, by the patient accumulation of small attentions until they add up to knowing. I learned that the warmth of the day sun coming up off the planet eased her, so I dragged her, inch by inch over a week, with the winch on its gentlest setting and Pell working the controls with a tenderness I will love him for until I die, until she lay full in the great bar of light that came through the open hatch, and there she breathed easier. I learned that the silt and the deep growth had crusted into the joints of her wings and the seams of her scales and pained her, and so I spent my off hours with a soft brush and warm water, working the white crust loose a handsbreadth at a time, the way you'd groom an old horse, and as the crust came away the green-black of her came up underneath, and the bronze of her ridges, and in the sunlight she was, I swear to you, the most beautiful thing I have ever seen or will. I learned the sound of her breath so well that I slept by it, down in the hold on a cot I rigged from cargo netting, and when it changed in the night I woke before I was awake, the way a parent wakes. There was a cost to all of it, and I will not pretend there was not, because the cost is part of how small the thing was. The water I gave her was water I did not drink, and a man my age in a working hold does not give up 2 gallons a day of his own ration without paying for it in the slow ways that an old body keeps its accounts. The headaches, the cramping in the hands, the dull thick feeling behind the eyes that I worked through because the work does not care how you feel. I gave up my sleep, which at my age is a thing you do not get back, and I gave up something harder to name, which was my standing among the crew, such as it was. A salvage crew is a small, hard world, and it runs on every man pulling his weight toward the cut, and here was the oldest hand aboard pouring his weight and his water and his off hours into a thing that could not be sold, that filled a paying hold with no paying mass, that cost the ship its quota by the slow handsbreadth. They did not say much to my face. They were not unkind, but I heard the mutters go quiet when I came into the mess, and I felt the way a man feels when the others have decided, gently and without malice, that he has gone soft in the head with age, and are only waiting for the season to end so they can be rid of the embarrassment of him. Marta, who ran the sorting line and had crewed with me 11 seasons, stopped me one evening by the ladder and asked me, not cruel, only tired, what I thought I was doing and whether I knew it might cost me the rest of my cut and a clean name in the company besides. I told her I knew. She looked at me a while, the way they all looked at me that season, and then she said only that she hoped the animal was worth it and went on to her bunk. I did not have an answer for her then. I have one now. But I did not have it then, and so I only said good night and went down the ladder and gave the old creature my water in the dark. Pell was the one who stood by me, and I will not forget it. He was young and he sighed at the slow, but he worked the winch for me on his own off hours, dragging her inch by inch into the light with a tenderness I never had to teach him twice, and he carried the jug down the ladder when my shoulder locked up, and he never once asked me to justify it to him the way the others did. I asked him once why he helped, when it was costing the crew and could cost him too, and he shrugged the way the young shrug and said that his grandmother had died in a company ward with no one to sit with her because everyone had been at work, and that he had been at work, and that he reckoned somebody on this ship ought to get to sit with something at the end of it, even if it was only an old man and an old animal in a cargo hold. I have thought about that more than the boy will ever know. The work is what takes us from each other at the end. He had learned that young, the hard way, and he was paying it back to a dragon because he could not pay it back to her. I learned, too, that she knew me. I do not know how to prove it, and I do not care to try. But there came a day when I climbed down the ladder later than usual, my shoulder having locked up so that I could barely make the rungs, and from across that whole vast hold the great head lifted off the deck lifted, an effort that cost her. I could see what it cost her and turned toward the sound of me, and the clouded eyes found the place where I was, and something went out of her that had been holding tight, some long patient bracing against being alone, and she let her head down again easy, and waited for me to come. I named her Circe. I want to be careful here because the name turned out to matter more than I could have known, and I do not want you to think I was clever. I was not clever. There was that long flowing glyph on the face of the pod, the one half eaten by the crust, and over the weeks of cleaning her I had cleaned that too, idle, the way you polish a thing while your hands have nothing else to do, and the full shape of it had come clear. It was not a word in any tongue I had, but it had a sound to it, the way a written thing has a sound even when you don't know its language, and the sound my eye made of it was Circe, low and long, the first part rising and the second part falling away like water off a deck. So that is what I called her. Old girl mostly in the talking, but Circe when it mattered, Circe when I came down the ladder, Circe when I left at the end of a watch and did not want her to think she'd been left. And the first time I said it, the very first, weeks before I understood any of it, her breath caught. The long slow tide of it stopped, held, and her whole great body went still in a way that was not the stillness of dying but the stillness of listening, of a thing that has not heard its own name spoken aloud by another voice in so long that the sound of it is a kind of pain and a kind of mercy, both at once. Then she breathed again, and her head came toward me. And from somewhere deep in that vast chest there came a sound I had never heard a living thing make, a low rolling note like the sea heard from inside a shell, and I understood, without understanding anything, that I had touched something I had no business touching, and that she did not want me to stop. That should have warned me. If I had been a clever man, it would have. A thing that answers to a name that old in a place that drowned 300 years gone, a thing that vast, sealed in a pressure pod by hands that loved it enough to seal it, that is not dead cargo. That is somebody's grief set adrift and lost. But I was not clever. I was only kind, and only in the dull, plodding way of a man who has nothing else left to be. And so I went on cleaning her crusted wings in the sunlight and giving her my water and saying her name, and I never once asked myself who had loved her enough to seal her, or who might still be looking. They were still looking, they had never stopped. I learned the rest of it slowly, the way I learned everything, which is to say after the fact and from quieter mouths than mine. But I will lay it out for you the way I came to understand it, so that you will know what was moving toward us all that long bright season, while I was down in the hold worrying over an old creature's wings. Alessa had not always been a drowned world. It had been a green one once, and a great one, the cradle of a people that the lanes now called the tidehold of Saroth, dragons, an old and patient and seafaring kind, who had built their first cities along the warm, shallow seas of that world, and had loved the water the way some peoples love the sky. And 300 years before the Fairwind ever came, something had gone wrong with the heart of that world. The records I was later shown were gentle and vague about it, the way records are gentle about a wound a people cannot bear to look at straight. And the seas had risen, slow at first and then not slow at all, and the green cradle of the tidehold had gone under. The whole world, every city. The shallow, warm seas they had loved had swallowed the land they had loved, and the people had taken to the stars in their grief, and made a sovereignty out there among the lanes, a strong one, a high one, and had never once gone back, because there was nothing to go back to but the grave of everything they had been. But they had lost something in the going under, not a city, not a crown, a person. Ceres, I came to learn, was the oldest living thing the tidehold had. She had been hatched on Alessa when it was still green, before the seas began to rise, and she alone of all of them carried in her own living memory the world as it had been, the warm shallows, the first cities, the look of the land before the water took it. She was there first. Not their ruler. They had rulers, generations of them, and the one who ruled when the Fairwind came was a great matriarch they called the Tide Mother, who was Cers's own descendant many times removed. But Ceres was the root the whole high sovereignty had grown from, the living memory of the cradle, and when the seas rose she had done the thing the eldest do. She had stayed too long, going back and back into the drowning cities for the ones who could not get out, until the day she did not come out herself, and the records said only that she was lost beneath the flood, and the tidehold had mourned her as a people mourns the heart of itself, which is to say without end. And they had searched. That was the part that undid me when I finally understood it. For 300 years the tidehold of Saroth had kept watch over the drowned grave of their world, not to salvage it. They would no more salvage Alessa than I would sell my own mother's bones, but to find her. They had sent their patient watchers along the lanes that bordered that dead system, generation after generation, listening, because the eldest of their kind do not die easily, and a body sealed in a pressure pod by loving hands in the last hour of a drowning world might, against every reason, still be breathing down there in the cold and the dark. They had searched the way you search for a thing you know in your heart you will not find, and must keep searching for anyway, because to stop is to admit it is gone. 300 years. Longer than the Fairwind, longer than the Salvage Company, longer than the maps that called the place Alessa. And then a tired old hauler with a quota to fill had dragged its grapples through the grave of their world, and pulled up a silk-crusted pod that read warm, and a 68-year-old hold hand with a bad shoulder had decided not to dump it. I did not know any of this. I knew only that, somewhere in the middle of that season, the Fairwind picked up a shadow. Pell saw it first on the long range, a faint return that hung at the edge of the system and did not approach and did not leave. Halloran watched it for a day and then for two and called it a survey buoy, and then could not call it that any more when it moved. It kept its distance. It never hailed. It only sat out there at the dark edge of the lanes, holding station off our salvage beacon, watching, and the not knowing of it put the whole crew on edge in a way that I, fool that I was, did not share, because I had a dragon to tend and no attention left over for shadows. What I know now is that our salvage beacon, the dumb automatic thing that pings out a ship's position and its manifest so that no one runs a working hauler down in the dark, had been pinging out, line by automatic line, the contents of number 3 hold, cut metal, hull plate, scrap mass. And then, because I had logged it the way I log everything, 51 years of habit, one line that no salvage beacon over that grave had ever broadcast before. A hold pod, recovered intact, contents organic, contents live. A watcher of the tide hold had been holding station off Alas's grave, the way watchers had held it for 3 centuries, expecting nothing, the way you expect nothing on the 10,000th night of a watch. And the dead world had spoken one line into the dark that no one had ever dared to hope it would speak. Contents live. They did not come at once. I have thought about that too. They did not come roaring in to seize her, though they could have unmade the Pharaoh with a thought, and we all knew it once we understood who they were. They came slow, and they came careful, and they sent their watcher ahead to look. The way you send your steadiest eyes ahead when the thing you are walking toward is the thing you have spent your whole life not letting yourself believe in, because if it is not true, you do not think you can bear to have hoped. For days that shadow at the edge of the system did nothing but watch, and what it watched, I am told, was a column of sunlight in an open hold, and a great old creature lying easy in the warmth of it, and a small slow human moving around her with a brush and a jug, cleaning the deep out of her crusted wings, and talking to her in a low, steady voice, and sleeping at night on a cot of cargo netting where he could wake to the sound of her breathing. It watched me name her, it watched her answer. I did not know I was being watched. If I had known, I do not think it would have changed what I did, but I would have done it differently, more carefully, more conscious of the size of the thing, and the carefulness would have made it less than it was. The whole of what I gave her was that I did not know. I tended her the way a man tends a dying creature when he believes with his whole heart that no one is looking and no one will ever know and there is no reward in it of any kind, which is to say, I tended her for no reason but her, because she was alive and she was suffering and she was, by the end, my friend. That is the only thing I have ever done that was wholly clean. There was no audience in it. I thought there was no audience in it. And the great ones, watching from the dark, saw that there was none, and that, I am told, was the thing that broke them. The end of the season came on faster than the end of her did, though both were coming. The hold filled, the way holds do. The quota loomed. Halloran came down twice more to stand in the sunlight and look at her, and the second time he did not say anything at all about manifests or sanctuaries. He just stood there a while, an old salvage captain looking at a thing his ship had pulled up out of a grave, and then he put his hand on my good shoulder on his way out, which he had never done in all the seasons I'd crewed for him, and I understood that whatever I had been doing down there, he had stopped thinking of it as foolishness and started thinking of it as something else, though neither of us had the word. Ceres was failing. I had known from the first day that I could not save her. You do not save the very old from being old. And you should not try. The trying is its own unkindness, and I had never once told myself a story in which I did. What I had told myself was only that she would not go back into the dark, and that she would not go out alone, and that for whatever time was left she would lie in the sun and be clean and have her name said to her by a voice that was glad of her. That was all I had promised. In the wordless way, a man promises a thing to a creature that cannot hold him to it. And I kept it. Her breath came slower. The long pause in the middle of the tide grew longer. There came nights when I lay on my cot in the dark of the hold and counted the pause out, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and did not breathe myself until she did. And some of those nights I was sure, lying there, that the next pull would not come, and then it would, a little less than before, and I would let my own breath go, and we would both keep on a while longer. It was on one of those mornings, with the sun just coming up off the water of the drowned world and filling the hold with that gold light, that the tide hold came. There was no battle. I want to be clear about that because it was the thing I least expected and the thing I have been least able to make people understand. I had grown up on the idea that power arrives the way a storm arrives, all noise and threat, and that a thing as small as me, caught in front of it, gets swept away. That is not what happened. What happened was that the long range went quiet. Pell told me later that the shadow at the edge of the system did not so much approach as simply, between one watch and the next, be there, and be enormous, and be many. And then the great open hatch of number 3 hold, which had stood open to the empty bright sky all season, was open instead to them. They did not crowd in. They could not have. They were too large and there were too many, and the dignity of them would not have allowed it. They came to the threshold and no further, holding station in the bright air outside the hatch, rank on rank of them falling away into the daylight, and the light came up off the water far below and caught the scaled lengths of them so that the whole sky outside my hold was full of dragons, vast and patient and shining, more than I could count, more than I could take in. The tide-hold of Saroth, come at last to the grave of their world. And one came forward to the threshold alone. She was greater than Ceres had been even at her greatest, I think, though it was hard to be sure, for Ceres was so reduced by then. This one was whole and strong and ancient in her own right, her scales the deep blue-green of open water with a sheen of pearl along the ridges, and she set the great claws of her forelimbs on the lip of my hold's hatch, gently, so gently, the way I had taught Pell to set down the pods, and she lowered her enormous head into the sunlit space, and she looked across that whole hold to where Ceres lay in the bar of light, and I watched a power that could have ended my whole world go absolutely, perfectly still. This was the Tide Mother, Ceres's own blood, 300 years removed, the one who ruled the sovereignty that had searched for 3 centuries. And she did not roar and she did not weep, not in any way I could have named as weeping, but the breath went out of her in a long shaking pull, and a sound came out of her that was the twin of the sound Ceres had made the first time I said her name, that low rolling note like the sea heard from inside a shell, and across the hold in the bar of light, the great old head lifted off the deck. Lifted, an effort that cost her everything she had left, I could see what it cost her, and turned, and found the place where the Tide Mother stood at the threshold of my hold. And the same long shaking note came back across the gold light, the two of them calling to each other over 300 years and the width of a salvage hold, the lost first and the great-granddaughter's great-granddaughter who had never, in all her long life, expected to hear that voice with her own ears. I had got to my feet by then, the way you do, and I had backed against the cold wall of the hold with my brush still in my hand, because I did not know what was wanted of me, and I was, I will admit it, afraid not of being killed. There was no killing in that bright air, but of being in the way of something so far above me that I had no business standing in the same light as it. And the Tide Mother's great pearl-ridged head turned from Ceres, slow, and the enormous clouded but not clouded eyes, clear where Ceres's were clouded, found me where I stood against the wall. I have been looked at by that gaze, and I will spend the rest of my life trying and failing to tell you what it was. There was the whole grief of 300 years in it. There was a power in it that I felt in my chest like a pressure change. And there was, under those, the thing I had seen on Halloran's face going out of the hold all those weeks before, and had not had a word for. The thing a strong soul feels watching a weak one do a costly kindness for no reason the ledger can explain, and being unable to look away. The look I had thought belonged only to tired men. It was on the face of a queen of dragons, turned on me, and it was the same look, and that was when I finally understood that there is only one kind of that look, and it does not care how high or low you are when it finds you. She spoke to me, not in my tongue, they had no tongue of mine, but the meaning came across all the same, the way the meaning of a thing comes across when the one giving it means it with their whole self. She asked me, in that wordless, enormous way, how long. Most of the season, I said. My voice came out cracked and small in all that bright air. I pulled her up at the start of the season. I've had her since. How long had she been alone before that, was what she meant. How long in the pod, in the dark, in the cold, under the flood. And I understood, and I had to tell her the truth, which was that I did not know, that the pod was 300 years gone under by the reckoning of every chart, and that I could not tell her how long the old creature in the light had lain alone in the dark before a tired hauler, with a quota, had dragged her up by accident into the sun. The Tide Mother held very still at that. The whole sky full of dragons outside my hatch held still. And then she asked the only other thing she asked me, which was the question I have turned over more nights than I can count. She asked me why I had not put her back. I did not have a grand answer. I have wished since that I'd had one something worthy of the size of the asking, something a queen of dragons could carry away. But I have only ever had small answers, 51 years of small answers, and so I gave her the one I had. She read warm, I said. Warm's not the word you use for a fire, warm's the word you use for a body. I looked across the hold at the great old head lying easy in the light, watching us both. I've spent my whole life pulling the dead up out of the cold. I didn't have it in me to put something living back down into it. That's all it was. That's all it ever was. And the Tide Mother of all the Saroth, the high power of a sovereignty that ruled lanes I would never travel, lowered her enormous head, not to me, I want to be careful. It was not the kneeling that the stories make so much of. There was no court bowing, no crowd going down. That has never been what it was. She lowered her head to the threshold of my small hold, to the lip of the hatch where her claws rested, and she set her brow against the cold steel of it, the steel of a tired salvage hauler, the way you set your brow against the door of a house where something you love has been kept safe. And she held it there, and the whole bright sky full of her people lowered their heads with her, slow in the daylight. Not in triumph and not in worship, but in a grief so old and so suddenly answered that it had no other shape to take. Then she came in. Only her, only the Tide Mother, folding herself impossibly through the great hatch and into the hold, and she crossed to the bar of light where Circe lay, and the two of them put their heads together, the lost first and the one who had never stopped searching, and what passed between them then was not mine to hear, and I did not try to hear it. I went and stood by the cold wall, and I let them have it. 300 years. You do not stand in the middle of 300 years. You stand against the wall, and you are glad you were of use, and you wait. Circe did not last the day. I had known she would not. I think she had known it too, and had been waiting, the way the very old will wait for the one face they need before they let go. She went out in the sun, in the warmth that had eased her all season, clean of the deep that had crusted her, with her own blood's head laid alongside her own, and the whole sovereignty of her people gathered in the bright air outside the hatch to see their first home. And at the very end I was there for it. The Tide Mother had turned her great head and found me at the wall and called me forward with her eyes, and I had gone, because you do not refuse that. At the very end, the great old head turned slow, the last slow movement she ever made, and the clouded eyes found me, and I put my hand on her brow the way I had 100 times in the off hours when no one was watching, and I said her name, Circe. Low and long, the first part rising and the second falling away like water off a deck. And her breath went out, the long tide of it, the longest pull yet, and the pause came. And I counted it, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, the way I always had, and I waited for the pull to come back in, the way it always had, a little less than before. It did not come back in. I kept my hand on her brow a while. The sun came up off the water and filled the hold. No one moved. And then the Tide Mother made one last sound, low, the sea inside the shell, and I took my hand away, and it was finished, and she had not died in the dark, and she had not died alone, and 300 years of searching had not ended in a grave but in a column of daylight with her own people's voices around her, and an old man's hand on her head, saying her name. That is the whole of what I did. I want you to see how little it was. I gave a dying creature my water and the use of a sunlit room and the sound of her own name, and I did not put her back in the cold. Any man might have done it. I have to believe any man might have done it. But the Tidehold of Saroth had searched for 300 years and found, at the end of the searching, not the grave they had braced themselves for, but a small kindness already given freely by someone who thought no one would ever know. And I have come to understand that it is the freely, and the thinking no one will know, that they could not get past. They are an old and powerful people, and they have been offered every kind of service that power buys. They had never, in all their long sovereignty, been given a thing for nothing, by someone who expected nothing, in a room they thought was empty. That is the gift they had never been able to buy, and a tired hold hand had given it to their first without ever meaning to give it to them at all. They did not let me slip back to my logbook, though I tried. You will laugh, but I tried. When it was over, I picked up my brush and my jug because they were there and my hands wanted something to do, and I started, I swear it, to tidy the hold, because that was the work and the work is what I had. And the Tide Mother watched me do it, and I will never be sure, but I think, that the watching of an old man pick up his brush in a hold where the heart of her people had just gone out, and begin, out of nothing but habit and grief, to tidy up, was the moment she decided what she was going to do. They offered me everything. I want to be plain about it, because the offering was real and I do not want to seem to mock it. They offered me a place among them, an honored one, a long life by their reckoning and a high seat in the sovereignty and the freedom of lanes I would never otherwise see. The Tide Mother put it to me, through that wordless, enormous meaning, with a gravity that told me she meant every part of it, that it was not a courtesy but a debt she felt in her own old bones and meant to pay. And I told her no. I told her I was a hold hand. I told her I was 68 and my shoulder was bad and my hip was worse and I had 1 season left in me and a small pension at the end of it, and that a man my age does not change what he is and should not try. The trying is its own unkindness. I told her, and this was the hardest to say because I could feel how much she wanted to give me something, and it is a hard thing to refuse a grief that wants to thank you, that I had not done it to be thanked, and that taking a high seat for it would turn the one clean thing I had ever done into a thing I'd been paid for, and I did not want to be paid for it. I wanted it to stay clean. I had so little that was clean. I wanted to keep this. The Tide Mother was quiet a long time. And then she did the thing that I carry with me, the thing that was worth more than the seat and the long life and the freedom of the lanes, the thing that cost her something to give and cost me nothing to take, and so was the only gift between us that was rightly shaped. She gave me Circe's true name. The long flowing glyph from the pod, the one I had cleaned and polished idle while my hands had nothing else to do, the one my eye had made the sound Circe out of that had been close, she told me, closer than I had any right to come, but it had not been the whole of it. The whole of it was longer and older, and it meant, as near as the meaning came across to me, the one who went back, the one who stayed too long, the one who went back into the drowning for the ones who could not get out. That was who she had been to them all along for 300 years, the one who went back, and the Tide Mother gave me the whole true sound of it slow so that I could hold it, and told me that I was the last living thing outside the tide hold who would ever be given it, and the first in 300 years, and that I might say it when I thought of her, and that wherever I said it, it would be said among friends. And then she gave me a name of my own. Not a seat, not a long life, only a name, the way you give a name to one of your own. I will not write the whole of it here because some of it is not mine to spend, but the meaning of it I will give you because the meaning is the only part that matters, the one who stayed at the ebb. The ebb is the going out of the tide, the long pull, the part where the water leaves and you are not sure it will come back. The one who stayed at the ebb. The one who sat with the tide while it went out, and did not leave, and did not put it back in the dark. That is my name among the tide hold of Saroth, and it is the only inheritance I ever cared to leave, and I have left it now, to you, in the telling. They took her home. They did it the way they did everything, with no noise and no spectacle, only a great gathering of the bright air outside my hatch and a slow lifting and a turning, and the whole sovereignty of them folding away into the daylight with their first born up in the midst of them, carried not as a body is carried, but as a homecoming is carried, back along the lanes to whatever place a starbound people makes when their world is a grave and their dead has been found. The Tide Mother was the last to go. She put her great pearl-ridged head once more through the hatch of my small cold hold, into the bar of light where Circe had lain, and she looked at the empty place a long moment, and then she looked at me, and the meaning that came across from her then was not grand at all. It was only this, that I should be well, that I had been seen, that a thing I thought no one would ever know had been known after all by the highest of them, and that it had been enough. Then she was gone, and the sky outside my hatch was empty and bright and ordinary, and I was alone in number 3 hold with a brush and a jug and a cot made of cargo netting, and the season was nearly over, and the work was what I had. So I did the work. There was nothing else to do, and there was nothing else I knew how to do, and I have come to think that the doing of it was the truest goodbye. I tidied the hold. I coiled the netting. I logged the last of the cut metal. Pell came down the ladder white-faced and full of questions, and I had no answers for him that would fit in a young man's questions. So I gave him the work to do beside me, and he did it. And after a while the work answered the questions the way it always does, which is by being there to be done when the great things have passed over and gone. Halloran finished the season's quota a little short, and the company docked the difference, and I let them. I had given my water and my sleep and my last good season to a dying creature, and got back a name no money could touch, and I was not about to argue with a salvage company over the difference. I took my pension at the end of it the way I'd always meant to. I'm an old man now, older than I was, and my shoulder has not improved and my hip is worse, and I keep a small place planetside near a shallow, warm sea, which I chose for reasons I did not fully understand when I chose it and understand perfectly now. In the mornings the sun comes up off the water and fills my small rooms with gold light, the same gold light, and I sit in it. That is most of what I do now. I sit in the light, and some mornings when the tide is going out, the long pull, the part where the water leaves and you are not sure it will come back, I say her true name, low and long, the way I was given it, the one who went back, and I think of a vast old creature lying clean and easy in a column of sunlight, 300 years out of the dark, not alone. I never told the great ones the thing I will tell you now to finish it, because by the time I understood it they were gone and there was no way to send it after them. It is only this. They thanked me for staying with her at the ebb. They named me for it. They carried the name of it back along the lanes, and they will say it. The Tide Mother told me, among friends, for as long as the tide hold lasts, which is longer than I can imagine. And all of that is true, and I am grateful for it, and I have tried to be worthy of it. But they had it backward a little, and I never got to tell them. I did not stay with her so that she would not be alone. I stayed with her because she would not let me be alone, a tired old hold hand at the end of his working life, who had spent 51 years pulling the dead up out of the cold, and had no one in all the lanes to say his name to. She drank off my hand and lifted her head when I came down the ladder and held still to listen when I spoke, and in the doing of it, she gave an old man the last thing he had thought he would ever have, which was to be needed by something at the end. So when they say I stayed with her at the ebb and call me by the name they made of it, I let them, because it is kind and it is true enough. But between her and me, in the empty hold where no one was watching and I thought no one ever would be, it was never the great deed they made it into. It was just two old things, in the last of the light, keeping each other company while the tide went out. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was the most I ever had.